Okay.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to Colin Broadwater on the Mad Lab Professional Coach Development Program webinar slash audio presentation slash podcast. I don't really know what the heck this thing is, but hey, we're here and it's going to be awesome. I have with me today Tony, the Professor Leyland, and we're here because we have been working together to build out the best possible education for the functional fitness trainer. And one of the main things that we have heard from you guys who have been actively working through the program is that you need us to offer the course material in more ways than the simple written format. You know the material is great and you are doing your best to absorb it, but you also know that you would be better off if you could listen to the experts present the material rather than just simply reading from a screen. So I'm sorry, please excuse the raw nature of this recording and presentation, but I wanted to get something out to you just as quickly as possible to see if something like this might be of value to you. If you do see value in it, I promise that we will do more and make our presentations better as we continue to hear your feedback and make adjustments. So without further ado, Professor Tony Leyland, welcome and thanks for joining me on this fine Sunday morning.
No problem, Colin.
For those of you who don't know the Prof, Tony is a senior lecturer at the Department of Biomedical Physiology and Kinesiology at the Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia, in the Great White North of Canada. He's taught at
The great wet north.
the Great Wet North this year. That's right. Um, he's taught at the university level for over 35 years and has been involved in competitive sports like soccer, tennis, squash, and rugby, both as an athlete and a coach for what, 50 over 50 years now, Prof?
Well, yeah, no, well, yeah. If you start adding soccer in, I probably was kicking. I'm 61. I'm kicking soccer balls since I was 3 or 4, probably.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I didn't know they were soccer balls then. They were footballs
Right. Better part of a lifetime, anyway.
because that is the
Um,
name of the sport, football.
that's right. American football
It's
is
American
what we play
football.
down here.
Yeah.
Not, yeah. He's a member of the National Strength Conditioning Association and the British Columbia Association of Kinesiologists, and is a Canadian National B licensed soccer coach, and still plays as often as time allows. I hope you're still getting out and kicking the soccer ball around, Tony.
Actually, no, no. I've contact sport. I probably hung them up a few years, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe a bit more. I
Oh, no, me
focus
too.
more on skiing. Well, tennis is my number one, probably skiing in terms of sports now. And then I do a lot of conditioning, a lot of weightlifting and stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah, too many clumsy guys out there in soccer. It just takes one bad tackle, and then my skiing and tennis would be affected.
Yeah, I conveniently lost my soccer cleats a couple years ago as well. Most importantly for you guys, though, out there listening, Prof has written several academic courses for our professional coach development program. Courses that include critical thinking, which we'll discuss today. What four, I think, nutrition courses, um, anatomy,
Yeah.
cardiorespiratory physiology, energy systems, basic neuroendocrine physiology. What am I forgetting there? A whole bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah, weight control. Yeah. You know, yeah. Well, and then basic. The exercise science modules pretty much cover everything else. I mean, there's some safety, and I'm occasionally linking to um, other academics. Steve Ray and Lon Kilgore in particular,
Right.
and another guy from Victoria, BC, Tony Weber. He wrote a good one on recovery. Um, but the exercise science would kind of cover everything else. Some biomechanics of the movements of lifting, that type of thing. Goes well with the anatomy. Yeah, lots in there. There's lots in there.
There is lots in there, and it's awesome material, university level stuff here for you guys. Um, so what we're gonna get done here today. So mostly what I wanted to offer to you guys out there, our students, our apprentices, our coaches, even gym owners out there listening to this material, is we wanted to offer you sort of an audio version of our very first academic module in the school. And again, if you do see value in this kind of presentation of the material, please let us know so we can get more done. I wanted to bring in Prof here so he could add in bits and pieces to help unpack some of the more complex sections of the critical thinking module. Not so it's just me simply reading through the material audiobook style, but a little bit of commentary as well. And Prof, I know we're just jumping into this thing and recording it off the cuff on a Sunday morning, no edits and such, but just jump in and interrupt when you want to add anything. Before we jump into that, though, I just wanted to start with you, Prof. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about why you decided to add this material to the school, why a critical thinking module in a fitness school, and then maybe why we decided to make it the first module to be presented.
Yeah, well, I think, if once we've gone through it, hopefully it will become apparent as to why this would go up front, because in my involvement with the CrossFit group, I did come across what I would call a lot of disciples, a sort of attitude, where I felt people were sort of just going with the flow and not being critical thinkers. And I think it's important for people to realize that humans are notoriously difficult to study. For many, many reasons. People's beliefs and, the placebos and, preconceived notions, etc., really do influence a lot of this field. Because we can't do a true experiment on a human being or a group of human beings, we are, we're not in the dark, obviously, in some areas, like anatomical science. Yeah, we can do dissections on cadavers, etc., etc. There's a lot we do know with, as absolute certainty as is possible. There's no such thing, I guess, as that absolute certainty. But other areas are very tenuous, and I think all of the people listening would realize that, nutritional science is probably the other extreme. So we know the heart has 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles in a healthy human being. That's a sort of a given. And then when we come into maybe movement mechanics, there's a lot we do know in terms of the way the forces apply and what is safe, all the way out to that far end of some aspects of nutrition. It's been so poorly studied, it's so difficult to study, that, well, I wouldn't say we're in the dark, but again, people listening to this will probably be the first to say, a new study comes out and challenges something that was standard virtually every week in the media. It's so it's something that you have to be accepting that. So a lot of the knowledge we have is a little bit more tentative than other aspects.
Absolutely, that's right. Cool. So having said that, we're going to get into this thing kind of audiobook style now with commentary from the prof. Yeah, so just stop me when you see it necessary, Tony. We'll have a bit of discussion.
Okay.
So all of the information in the Professional Coach Development Program is written in numerous research papers and on hundreds of blogs. Some of what we are going to say is also contradicted in some research and on hundreds of blogs. Some of that contradiction is due to a pervasive belief in quick fixes and magical cures. Some of it is due to ignorance, and some of it due to people not honestly following evidence. However, due to the difficulty of studying humans, many uncertainties are reasonable, and some of what is in the PCDP may indeed be erroneous. Actually, it would probably be best to say that some of the material in the PCD absolutely is erroneous. After nutrition lectures, Prof tells his students that 2 to 5%, possibly more, of what he's said is probably going to be proven incorrect. Problem is, we don't know which 2 to 5% is going to be incorrect. But there's nothing to be ashamed about in that statement. Better research and more sophisticated analysis equipment and techniques are bound to provide us with better information. It is true that some of the material in the PCDP is factual and not open to dispute. For example, the heart does indeed have 4 chambers. And ATP is the main energy currency of all cells, etc. Other topics, nutrition especially, as Prof was saying earlier, can be speculative and require that you read with an open and critical mind. Simply put, we are not asking you to unquestioningly drink the Kool-Aid. Please be critical. You have probably had a life-changing experience with functional fitness, and therein lies a danger. By this, we mean you might stop questioning what you are told or what you read because your training system is so potent. That would be a mistake, as we must continue to learn and improve our clients and ourselves.
I think also on that one, there's a danger as well, and I think this comes under critical thinking in a sense, is of because it worked for you, that it's going to work for somebody else, in the same way. And a motivation it is obviously a big factor. And you will probably get clients that have a different level of motivation than yourselves. And
That's for sure.
and they're going to require a little, and also just skill, a skill base, when they come in, and their capacity to learn movements, etc. And we could even take this critical thinking into the movements. Like, you may have a whole bunch of people coming in that you should never do an American kettlebell swing, and their shoulders wouldn't be able to handle it. You'd be better off with a Russian.
Yeah.
And just because the CrossFit standard in all of the competitions is an American kettlebell swing, that doesn't mean you have to do it.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a lot of 40, 50-year-olds that could benefit from some kettlebell swings, but their shoulders, certainly at the beginning, aren't going to be able to handle that American, as an example. And I think that's...
I think sometimes... Go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed in working with newer coaches, that a lot of times people have a little bit of a misconception of the population that they can help the most. A lot of times people are coming in thinking like, hey, I want to work with the really motivated population, people that really want to do their best, but those aren't necessarily the people that need our help the most. The people that need our help the most are the ones who are, in fact, very uncoordinated, and we can teach them how to move, right? But they're going to have movement restrictions, and people that are lacking in motivation. The people who are motivated and are already fit don't necessarily need our help. So even just switching your mindset a little bit in that way, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, and then our nice quote here from James Lett. Being a responsible adult means accepting the fact that almost all knowledge is tentative and accepting it cheerfully. You may be required to change your belief tomorrow if the evidence warrants, and you should be willing and able to do so. That, in essence, is what skepticism means. To believe if and only if the evidence warrants. Okay, as stated, although the PCDP presents a lot of information about the benefits of training, you must keep an open mind because we are generally presenting evidence from non-experimental studies. In a true experimental study, all variables are kept constant within the groups except the variable of interest. The simplest example of this is in chemistry, where you have two solutions with exactly the same concentration of chemicals, same volume, same temperature, etc. Then change one variable for one of the solutions and not the other. You can then be certain that any changes were due to changing that one single variable.
And I should say I'm not a chemist, so if there are any chemists listening, they might have something to say about that. But certainly, it is, an example just to show what a true experiment is, where you really can hopefully get a real good handle on the variable of interest, right? The outcome measure that you're looking for. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Wikipedia definition of an experiment is an orderly procedure carried out with the goal of verifying, refuting, or establishing the validity of a hypothesis. Controlled experiments provide insight into cause and effect by demonstrating what outcome occurs when a particular factor is manipulated. Controlled experiments vary greatly in their goal and scale, but always rely on repeatable procedure and logical analysis of the results. And if you understand the previous conversation we've been having here, I think you'll see how it is effectively impossible to quote-unquote experiment on humans. To do an experimental study on the effects of exercise, you would have to randomly split your population into two groups with identical lifestyles, except for their exercise habits. They would have to sleep the same, eat the same, smoke and drink the same, and so on. And even that wouldn't be enough, as ideally you should have 2 cloned groups so their genetic makeup is even identical. You might be able to do this with rats and mice, but it ain't going to happen with humans. Randomizing the selection of your human subjects and having a large number of subjects can reduce the effect of genetic differences between the groups. This is why large randomized trials are so important. However, you still can't force one group of people to exercise regularly for decades and force another group to remain sedentary. That would be unethical. In addition, you cannot easily monitor that the group who is supposed to be following the treatment, exercise in this example, is actually going to do so. A group's adherence to any exercise and/or nutritional regimen can be difficult to ascertain. Instead, we rely on epidemiological studies. In an epidemiological study, we compare the health of populations as they present themselves without any manipulation. We may look at groups of exercisers compared with non-exercisers, or groups with physically active occupations versus those with sedentary occupations. We then see if there are correlations, which is a measure of how related two things are, between variables of interest, such as inactivity and heart disease. Epidemiology, Wikipedia definition. The science that studies the patterns, causes, and effects of health and disease conditions in defined populations. This is the cornerstone of public health and informs policy decisions and evidence-based practice by identifying risk factors for disease and targets for preventative healthcare. However, it's important to remember that correlation is indeed not causation. If a physically active group is healthier than a sedentary group, it may not be due to physical activity. The active group may eat a healthier diet, smoke less, get better medical care, be emotionally calmer, or have better genes. Interestingly, research shows that those who are physically active do tend to eat better and smoke less than the average population. Therefore, the obvious fact that many variables are different between study groups complicates analysis of the results in human studies. It is safe to say that not all epidemiological research is equal. There are many ways to design such studies, and while it may seem logical to use the best design, this is not always practical or ethical. Below is a discussion on the types of studies you will hear about and things to be aware of. Before you start reading any results, you should be aware of the type of study that has been conducted. So, randomized control trials. So we have a whole bunch of kind of technical information coming up here in the next few sections here. Years ago, I don't know how many years ago, not that many years ago, when I first read this critical thinking module, some of this information was new to me and some of it wasn't. And to get through it, though, and to really kind of get the information in my brain so I could get through the multiple choice test, quiz, I guess we call it, and then the oral examination to follow. I spent a fair amount of time at the whiteboard with notes, just kind of writing things down. So the way that I would approach this for you guys out there is listen to this audio version. Tony, if you have anything to add, of course, maybe that'll help make it stick. But write it down, practice, right? There's just some terminology in here that you might not be comfortable or familiar with. So you just need to actually sit down and study the material. Anything to add to that, Tony?
Yeah, no, but I think actually it's probably not as technical. I mean, yeah, when you start throwing out terms, randomized control trials, non-randomized, people may start thinking, oh, gee, I've got to, write that down and keep that memory. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it is fairly straightforward. And the example I tend to give is that with vitamin supplementation. If you do an epidemiological observational trial where you just observe, and when we say observe in epidemiology, this would probably be a retrospective questionnaire type thing. You would just give people questionnaires. Do you take multivitamins? That kind of thing. Keeping it very simple, obviously, in the design, and you then classify a whole group of individuals, those that do and those that don't, and then you might follow those for years, but a lot of it is retrospective. You just want to see, okay, what's been the health outcomes of these people, And if you do that, you're not going to be surprised that the people that take the vitamin supplements tend to do better on, lower health problems, lower rates of health problems.
Right.
However, if you do a randomized control trial where you take a whole bunch of people and you say, right, we're going to give you vitamins, and then another group, and we're going to give you vitamins, but you don't actually give them vitamins. You give them placebo pills. They can't tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that actually properly design such a trial is what we would call a double blind. So not only does the two groups not know what they're getting, whether they're getting the vitamins or the placebo, and typically they even have a third group that don't get anything as a true control. The people that are actually administering, because now you can see the extra expense here, Colin, right? I mean, now we're really getting involved. We're not just questionnaires, which are notoriously difficult to validate. I mean, there are a lot of questionnaires that are validated, but people's memories still aren't that great. But now I'm actually giving them, they might be coming in, so you're paying researchers to interact. It's expensive. But the people that are actually giving the pills out, they don't even know whether they're giving somebody a true vitamin supplement or a placebo. And the reason for that double blind is because there's been studies again to show that if I know, and we know a lot of human communication is nonverbal, good chance I'll give it away, even if I'm not trying to give it away.
Right.
Anyway, we do a study like that, a randomized control trial, and guess what? There isn't any difference. People that take the multivitamin don't do better, and the reason being is, for the most part, if people are eating a decent North American diet or whatever, they don't need them.
Yeah.
Why in the non-random, why in the observational study, the epidemiological study, do we see it? And that goes back to what I said earlier, is if people believe that something's going to work for them, then yeah, it might. I mean, the placebo effect is very, very strong. I'm sure everybody listening to this understands the placebo. Like, if you really believe that this is going to work for you, there's a good chance that it will. I mean, not obviously 100% chance, and we're talking, a percentage enough that would skew the results to show that group had healthier outcomes. So you really do have to try and take out placebo effects, and and this is one of the areas where I think, I know he's going to talk about it at some point in this, is the paleo diet. We don't have enough research to suggest that it isn't somewhat placebo, or it isn't potentially the fact that people are eating paleo diets, the Paleolithic diet. The benefit is that they're not, they're reducing their glycemic index and their sugar.
Right.
All right. I mean, right there, that could, there's too many variables that are being changed. You can't look at a group that are eating a paleo diet and a group eating a regular one and say the paleo people are healthier, therefore paleo's the way to go. You actually can't do that, because what are those paleo people doing? A lot of them are exercising more than the other group. This is just like in society. They don't have anywhere near the same amount of processed food, which has a lot of evidence against it, etc., etc. It's very, very difficult. You go and look at Holland, and the males there are the tallest in the world, and you go, I don't know if anybody's been to the Netherlands, but they eat pancakes and breads and cheese like there's no tomorrow. So you have this group, pretty good health statistics for a nation. They're the tallest. I mean, you can say that's genetics, but they eat tons of wheat and tons of dairy. So as a bit of a joke, I could say they have an anti-Paleolithic diet.
The anti-paleo diet. I haven't heard of that one yet. I mean, sounds fantastic.
If you actually think about a strict paleo diet, I have people arguing, we weren't farmers 30,000 years ago. We shouldn't have any wheat. We shouldn't have any dairy. Okay, here you go. You could be right, but then you've got other data. You're looking at the Dutch, like, hang on a second, I don't know. And certainly evidence, I mean, the dairy is definitely less of a red flag, because we can do studies to see genetic changes where people have keep producing lactase into adulthood in lots of populations, Northern Europeans as high as 95%, and certain African groups, Maasai, etc., also. So they're genetically adapted to having animal milk past being weaned. So we do know that one makes sense. So yeah, so it's just got to keep a critical mind, critical thinking, right?
Yeah. So getting back to the material here that we're going through, so the importance of the text I'm about to read through here, audiobook style, is that so people can learn to think more critically about the material that they're reading. So they can say, so they're reading something, they're going, like, well, this doesn't seem quite right, or wow, this is really interesting, I wonder if it's true. So you can actually look at, okay, so this, you go find some studies about where this information came from, be like, oh, like, this is a really solid study, because, I mean, obviously it's not going to be double blind or whatever, but this study was conducted really well, and there's no way you're going to know whether or not the study was done well if you don't understand the way that this stuff is run, right?
Right.
That's the purpose of offering this information. Am I correct in that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And sometimes it isn't really, especially if you're reading at media, they're not going to necessarily tell you the design, the study. And this is the problem. A lot of people don't have the time to go and look at the original research, etc. But again, the idea here is just to be critical. Like, okay, that's interesting. I wonder, is that going to be repeated? Like, if it's the first time you're hearing something, I'd be very, very weary about changing any behaviors. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, we're all working. We all have other stuff to do, and lots of different studies come out every day. So it is difficult. But if you certainly, are at least trying to find, specialized, but good summaries from university prof or some researchers or good media, rather than sensationalism. Being able to have a sort of sensationalist kind of warning, like, oh, this seems a bit over the top, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get through this next section here. If you're out there studying right now and using this as study time, get your notebook out, have a pen, paper ready, and take some notes as we go through this. And listen closely. So randomized control trials. These are the most rigorous way of determining whether a cause-effect relationship exists between the treatment and the outcome. Simple as that. Randomized control trials have several important features. Random allocation to intervention groups. Subjects and researchers should remain unaware of which treatment was given until the study is completed. As Prof said earlier, these are called double-blind studies. All intervention groups are treated identically except for the experimental treatment. Subjects are normally analyzed within the group to which they were allocated, irrespective of whether they experienced the intended intervention. The analysis is focused on estimating the size of the difference in predefined outcomes between intervention groups.
Yeah, that's important that, we are trying to see some significant results. If there's a slight benefit, that even within a randomized control trial, it could well just be by chance, because this still isn't a true experiment. People are going to understand. So the effect, the size of the effect, between groups that smoke and don't smoke is large in terms of negative health outcomes.
Right.
With other areas, it may not be enough to say it's pretty sure that this is happening. It could just be by chance.
Gotcha. So placebos. Hopefully you're all aware that a placebo is a simulated ineffectual treatment. A simulated ineffectual treatment. A good example is giving one group vitamin C and the other a placebo or a sugar pill, and seeing if the group receiving the vitamin C gets fewer colds. It is important that the two groups do not know what treatment they are getting, the actual treatment or the placebo. In a double-blind study, the researchers administering the treatment also do not know whether the subjects are getting the treatment or the placebo. Nice little review here. Clearly, a double-blind study is not feasible in our area of interest. If someone is changing their diet or exercise regimen or the number of hours they sleep, they're certainly going to know about it. This does mean we have to be extra careful in our areas of interest, as placebos can be extremely powerful. If you really believe that sleeping 9 hours instead of your usual 7 is going to be great for you, well, then it's probably going to be. However, without a control group, it is not possible to say whether the improvement is due to the actual treatment of an additional 2 hours of sleep or the belief that this is a positive step. Little story here. May 2014, Prof attended a session at the American College of Sports Medicine Conference on the placebo effect in sports science research. There was a brilliant presentation by Dr. Fabrizio Benedetti from the University of Turin Medical School in Turin, Italy. Dr. Benedetti has set up an experiment where the subjects had to squeeze a hand dynamometer, which measures your grip strength, until fatigue. To make this even more difficult and painful, he occluded blood flow to the forearm by using a blood pressure cuff on the upper arm, cutting off circulation. The groups trained and then had a set day for a quote-unquote final test. If the subjects were in a group that was administered morphine, they scored better during the training and also in the final test score. Not super surprising, as morphine reduces perceived pain and discomfort. However, he also showed that if the subjects trained with morphine but were then administered a placebo for the test day, they still tested much higher than the group without a placebo. In a subsequent group, he was also able to administer a drug that would block the effects of morphine on the opiate receptors in the brain, and hence the performance was decreased. Fascinatingly, if this drug was administered to the group receiving the placebo, it would reduce the placebo effect. This shows placebo effect is a definite physical effect and not in a sense, quote unquote, only in your mind. The study showed that the placebo effect was, like the morphine, acting on the subject's opiate receptors, presumably by the natural release of neuropeptides such as endorphins.
Yeah, so I think that's, people could say it's a bit of a moot point, like we just know placebos work, but it's fascinating to show that we're actually releasing chemicals that affect the brain that will reduce our fatigue or reduce our perceived pain in a very physical way, and because sometimes people have this sort of like brain-body separation, but they shouldn't have that.
Yeah, there are actual physical changes here happening here. Like you would think about what you're saying as a coach, and you think about the impact that you're having on people. Simply telling people that they're going to be better because of the things that you're doing with them. Oh, take this supplement or do these exercises, right? Do exactly what I say, and they believe it, right? Man, it's
and that can be a good
God,
thing,
huh?
as long as you're keeping them safe and not giving them, ridiculous, like weights or, fatiguing them or, asking them to pay for, thousands of dollars extra food cost over the year.
Yeah.
Just because you think it might work for them, but outside of that, motivating clients is what you have to do to keep them coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so back to Dr. Benedetti, who also conducted a study where subjects lifted weights via a cable machine but couldn't see the weight stack. The treatment group trained with a set weight and did a certain number of reps to failure, and then for a second training period, the weight stack was reduced. They obviously performed more reps at this time. Later, the weight was put back to the original level, and they continued to perform much better.
So that basically they were lifting like say 60 pounds, and we reduced it to 50. They did a lot more reps. Then later, when they have to redo it, they expect to do that number of reps. So they did it, even back at the higher weight.
Yeah, and that's fantastic, right? So nothing unethical about that, right?
No.
Just trick people into doing more work, which is, there's many different ways to do this. Is it unethical to make sure that a certain client comes to the gym when other clients are there? They know that they're going to enjoy being around? Absolutely not. It's just a way of getting people to get fitter, right? So do it any way that you have to within ethical boundaries. A control group was used to make sure this wasn't a training effect. It was a placebo effect. They believed they should be able to lift the weight X number of times, so even though the weight was increased back up to the original weight, they performed more reps. Placebos can be verbal suggestions and encouragement. They don't even have to be sugar pills. So as Prof said earlier, when it comes to human health, it's not necessarily possible to conduct a double-blind randomized control study for every question we have. Other study designs are not as robust, more prone to error, but they are necessary. Stay with me here, okay? Ready? This is a long section. Keep your notebook ready. Take notes as needed. Non-randomized control trials. Although randomization is preferable because it helps to control for factors other than the intervention that may be responsible for differences in outcomes, non-randomized assignments may be necessary when randomization is not feasible or ethical. An example of this is the presence of a defined population group that may benefit from the treatment, but that others may be harmed by the treatment, say diabetics and non-diabetics. With small numbers, you may not be able to randomize your subjects, but have to compare your group with a control group of diabetics from another population. Non-randomized clinical trials are sometimes referred to as quote-unquote quasi-experimental clinical trials or quote-unquote non-equivalent control group designs, because the characteristics of subjects in non-randomized groups will tend to be non-equivalent. Non-randomized control trials can detect associations between an intervention and outcome. However, they cannot rule out the possibility that the association was caused by another factor linked to both intervention and outcome.
But these are still good trials. You really are trying, as best, as a researcher to get at these answers, but you're just in a situation where you cannot feasibly randomize.
Right.
But there's more likelihood of error in a non-randomized than there is in a randomized. That's the key thing.
Gotcha. So let's look at retrospective and prospective case control studies here. Okay, so first of all, case control studies are non-experimental observational studies. I'll say that again. Case control studies are non-experimental observational studies. In a case control study, subjects who are known to have the outcome of interest are first identified as cases, and then a comparison group or control group is assembled. Ideally, this control group would have many similar traits, things like socioeconomic status, race, age, gender. Both groups are then evaluated, and the distribution of past exposures, risk factors, and/or subject characteristics in the case and control groups are compared. Okay, so in a retrospective case control study, the assessment of the exposure or risk factor occurs after subjects are classified as cases or controls. In a prospective case control study, all measurements of the exposure or risk factor variables are recorded before subjects are classified as cases or controls. However, you should see the problem with this type of study is that you are only controlling who gets into your case and control groups, and not controlling for an intervention. Okay, cohort studies, retrospective and prospective cohort studies. Cohort studies are observational, meaning that the goal of the investigator is to observe outcomes as they occur, rather than to experimentally manipulate outcomes by applying an intervention. Many cohort studies begin by identifying a group of people who are initially free of the outcome of interest, but who vary in terms of their degree of exposure to various factors that may cause or prevent the outcome. In a retrospective cohort study or historical cohort study, the cohort is identified from past records and followed from the time of those records up to some defined point in the recent past or up to the present time. Study outcomes are assessed at this defined point, and the investigator goes back in time to determine the subject's exposures and risk factor characteristics. You can imagine this can be quite difficult. In a prospective cohort study, the cohort is assembled in the present and followed into the future. Study outcomes are recorded after baseline characteristics of subjects have been assessed.
Yeah, we've got a huge one going on here in BC that I'm a subject in, which is a prospective, and they're going to be looking at cancer, coronary heart disease, etc. But basically, you signed up and you had to fill out huge forms of all of your present health status. I had to take waist, hip, girth, body weight, whatever, all that type of stuff. And then what they did there, because there's so many thousands of subjects, they actually did a randomized group where they basically just asked people if they would come in to get measured, and I was asked to do that, but they just couldn't do it for everybody. But again, the idea was to sort of try and validate the response. So many different nuances, but you had to go in and did a bone density scan on me, grip strength, etc., etc., trying to get more, objective data. But then they could also relate that back to the accuracy of what I'd done just online with the forms. Really, I mean, those are tough. I don't think people should really try to write all that down and regurgitate it. I think the main thing is to understand the complexity and the whether you're controlling who gets into your group or whether you're giving people a set exercise regime or a set diet, whether you're controlling intervention. That all of these are sort of observational in nature. They're not experimental, and there are always other factors that could affect. So I think that's the message, rather than really trying to be able to regurgitate what a prospective cohort study is. I think that would be too much for this level.
Yeah. So just opening the discussion there and letting folks know, kind of opening up the doors to the complexity, so people can kind of see and understand that. We're not necessarily looking for folks to write papers on these different types of studies.
No,
but yeah. So we're offering a significant amount of information there. Take it for what it is. They're not going to be specific questions on and testing on that specific material there. Okay, so an example of these types of studies might be researchers identifying that Polynesians living in New Zealand have high levels of chronic health issues. A control study group was then identified still living on Polynesian islands, and then retrospectively the researchers studied lifestyles to try and identify risk factors. Obviously, you probably already know that we would find the Polynesians living on the islands eating a more traditional diet would have little to no chronic health diseases. I'm going to read that again. Obviously, you probably already know that we would find the Polynesians living on the islands eating a more traditional diet would have little to no chronic health diseases. However, you cannot control lifestyle retroactively, so many factors might be causing this difference. The Western diet, lack of exercise, high stress level. With retrospective studies in particular, it can be difficult even to determine exposures to any lifestyle factors. Single subject experimental design. So I'm just going to say here, these types of studies are more common in clinical settings and are not generally used to suggest exercise and diet modification.
However, I would say, in many ways, the people listening to this have got to understand that that is what they are, in many ways, doing with their clients. They should be monitoring their client, their performance, their health, other factors, and prescribing exercise and maybe discussing diet. Obviously, it's outside of the realm of a lot of people's scope of practice to prescribe a diet if the client has a medical condition, but you can certainly generally recommend just a general healthy diet. And if you're monitoring things and people are getting better, people are improving, then in many ways, that's as good as it can get, because there are so many variables, and this is where, the coach has to be a bit more of a scientist in like, in the sense of studying their client, like taking some measurements. What is their, how many push-ups they got, how many this they got, talking to them. Oh, you've been to the doctor. Well, how's your blood pressure? I know that was high last time. And just seeing and really trying to get like data on your client, helping them through lifestyle changes, exercise, diet, whatever, maybe issues around stress, making sure they get out for walks in nature, whatever, and then reassessing. Okay, you went back to the doctor. What was your blood pressure like? What was this like? And actually keeping that, like treating yourselves as a coach/scientist.
So am I hearing you correctly in saying that we should treat all of our clients, each individual client, as an experiment unto itself?
Well, no, obviously experiment seems to be maybe a negative connotation there, but yeah, in a way that you're monitoring, in the sense that an experiment, you're sort of monitoring changes, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That in many ways, what you've got with each client is a single subject experiment.
Yeah. So intelligent experimentation.
Yeah.
I like to think of experimenting on myself. Like obviously we change as we age. I treat myself differently now in my 40s than I did in my 20s. And the only way I'm going to know how my body's going to react to things is by experimenting with myself and what my reactions are going to be.
Yeah, I've certainly reduced weights and gone for more higher rep maximum sort of sets when I'm weight training, and monitoring, how I feel and how that benefit is. So that is a single subject experiment.
Yeah.
I'm taking measurements. I'm applying a treatment. All right, I'm not going to do 5 rep maxes. I'm going to go to 15, 20 rep maxes, whatever, and see what the outcome is.
Yeah. Great. Not necessarily going to be seeing any research like this published on a regular basis, though, being based on a single subject, right?
Oh, yeah, no. No. Those will be clinical. Some of them are clinical trials, and they're important, say, for a surgeon to a new procedure and stuff. But it's not like they're not large randomized control trials for sure.
Okay, moving on. Case report and case series. Similar to single subject experimental design, except that the researcher does not manipulate the intervention in a case report/series, but merely describes or documents what happened during the normal course of the intervention. Again, these are more common from clinical research and not too common in the studies we will usually read. Cross-sectional correlational analyses. A cross-sectional study is an observational study of a defined population at a single point in time or over a defined period of time. The investigators of the study can collect data for a cross-sectional study, or it can be gathered from existing records or databases, usually a government health agency database. Cross-sectional studies are often used to generate descriptive information on the prevalence of health outcomes or determinants of health. As you can probably imagine, the biggest limitations of analytic cross-sectional designs is that conclusions on causation cannot be made because of the lack of temporal ordering of the variables. You will read in Nutrition 101 that it is argued that some health claims in the field of nutrition might have picked the wrong causative factor to explain a disease incidence. There is also a huge issue of how data is collected. In the PCDP module, in this critical thinking module, there is a link to Mark Sisson's blog. And as you will read Nutrition 1, Prof does not, okay, so there's a huge issue of how data is collected. In the PCD module, there's a link to Mark Sisson's blog. Go find that and read it. As you will read in Nutrition 101, Prof does not eat a paleo diet, so we are not suggesting that we agree 100% with this blog post. However, it is very relevant to the critical thinking section. It deals with the claims that red meat is bad for you. Specific facts and external blogs are not examinable material unless stated otherwise. Sisson clearly dismisses such observational studies by noting what really should be obvious to us. How can you compare a steak, preferably grass-fed, with a hamburger that probably came with a white bun, indestructible fries, and a large sugar/high fructose corn syrup drink? The answer is you can't. And if such studies do not control for other variables that are clearly going to affect the hormonal response to the meal, then these studies have to be dismissed as flawed. We have discussed how we are often dealing with studies that may not be ideally designed. Admittedly, sometimes because the researchers cannot design them any better due to practical and ethical reasons. However, it is claimed that there is also fraud in the medical research community. Please read the brief blog in the module. I would emphasize that these claims are being made by a well-respected researcher.
Now, I should say in the critical thinking, appeal to authority is not enough. Just because Ian Andis is, a very well-respected researcher, you have to be critical of his, study as well, and of course of what I say. Just because I've been teaching at university for 35 years doesn't make it correct,
Right.
But let me read this one, Colin, just to give you a thing. He's looking that 80% of non-randomized control trials could be erroneous. Like these observational studies, 20% of randomized trials, 10% of even large randomized trials could be expected to produce false results. And obviously, he actually also suggests sometimes researchers are sort of manipulating the data, chasing stuff. And we go all the way back to Ansel Keys and the fat is bad for you model. I mean, he had data from 22 countries and only published it for 6 or 7, showing a correlation between coronary heart disease and fat consumption. But he could have picked other countries which had a different one. So that was clearly a strange, a manipulative error. But what also can happen is just genuine errors, and I think, to be honest, we probably have chased, high-fat diets to a point where, people started to just believe because they heard it so much. And there was a research article just recently, a few days ago, published, again, questioning whether or not we should even be talking about saturated fat as a bad thing, even though it still is out there. And so there's a real danger of chasing, the wrong, what's the word? Going down the wrong street.
Yeah.
Basically, it could be sugar, and we've kind of got there right now where we sort of thinking that this processed food is worse than natural fats and natural protein and just natural food, and maybe not worrying about chasing 50% of this and 40% of that as a macronutrient, just avoid processed as much as possible.
Cool. So the question is, Prof, should we ignore all studies? Probably not, huh?
No, because there are lots of randomized control, and like the ACSM articles, they have position statements on the American College of Sports Medicine, and their highest level of these are the stuff that you have the highest confidence in the cause and effect nature. It doesn't come from one randomized control trial. It comes from several, numerous large randomized control trials, and there are areas that have been studied enough with enough money that do have that, really quite numerous large randomized control trials. So we pretty much do know that exercise and exercise intensities, dose response, in terms of you get fitter if you get more intense without obviously overdoing the intensity and injury and negative fatigue issues. But we really do know that, and even studies that have just shown movement, like pedometer steps. There's so much wealth, and as we're going to talk about very briefly later, like even with epidemiology, if we can't ethically force people to smoke. So a lot of the smoking data is, it's retrospective, it's observational, it's epidemiological, But when you've got thousands upon thousands of studies, all showing large negative, effects of smoking, you can start to have confidence in that. You can have a very high level of confidence.
You can start to come to some basic conclusions.
Is when we start getting new ideas out there. Okay, well, I haven't heard that one before. Does it fit, what we know from the anatomy, the physiology, what science we've got is pretty fixed? Is it logical into that? Okay, just being critical about everything, but certainly not suggesting, we can just ignore stuff. It's a study. I'm gonna go off and do my own thing. You got to try and find evidence.
Right. All right, let's keep hammering through this thing. Despite the fact that epidemiological studies have limitations, they are necessary to give us some evidence on important questions that cannot be answered experimentally. However, we must be cautious, and we can only have confidence in the cause and effect nature of results from epidemiological studies if the below criteria are satisfied. These criteria are described below in relation to exercise, which is the independent variable, and health as the dependent variable, as this is of particular relevance to us. However, these two variables could be sugar intake and dental cavities, or any other pair of variables you care to study about. So the association between exercise and health must be repeatable or reliable. As a rule, never change your health behaviors on the basis of one study. Instead ask, have many studies found the same result? A one-off study should be viewed with caution. The results may have been obtained due to a mistake in the analysis. The group study may be atypical or a statistical anomaly. There is also the possibility that the researcher may have a vested interest in the results of the study. Many researchers funded by the tobacco industry found no correlation between smoking and lung cancer. The association between exercise and health must be strong. The relative risk associated with the behavior must be large. By this I mean that if exercising decreased your risk of heart disease by 1%, you probably shouldn't get too excited about it. If the relative risk is decreased by 50%, however, it's a pretty promising result. However, if the study showed that certain behavior reduced your risk of Madagascar swamp fever by 50%, but the chance of your getting the disease was 1 in 20 million in the first place, probably shouldn't get too excited. People often do not truly understand such statistics, and of course the media likes sensation. The association between exercise, diet, or other strategy and health must be logical. The researcher must propose a logical explanation for the association. For example, we can propose many physiological reasons why aerobic exercise improves heart function. Other obvious factors must be shown not to be the cause of the association. This is hard criteria to satisfy due to the nature of epidemiological studies. If your exercise group smokes less, people could argue that if it was lower smoking rates that resulted in better health for the exercising group. To try to control for this problem, some studies have examined groups that had very similar smoking rates and other health-related behaviors such as diet. They found that those that exercised regularly did indeed enjoy better health. Hooray. A few weeks before writing this... Go ahead.
I think that's pretty straightforward. I think what
yeah.
there, and I think in many ways that's a probably more important section than the listing the type of trials.
Absolutely.
That people realize a lot, because a lot of what is out there is observational, epidemiological, and just so, keeping those things in mind. Is this a significant improvement, with this particular behavior? Is it logical? Are there many studies saying this? Once that starts to add up, then you might start having some more confidence. And going back to James Lett's quote, but still keeping, that positive skepticism in the sense of like, okay, this looks like it's good, but I'm still going to be reading, I'm still going to be learning, and maybe I'll, tomorrow I might have to change my mind because, another really good study comes out,
Yeah, keep asking questions, right?
Yeah.
So another good little section here by about Peter Axe, the zoologist, and then we'll be wrapping this thing up here. So a few weeks before writing this section, Prof saw an article by this guy, Peter, who's a zoologist. He had written a book showing evidence that exercise shortened the lifespan. How would you have approached an analysis of these claims? Hopefully, you would have looked at the evidence presented to see whether it matched any or all of the criteria we just talked about above. In truth, this wasn't even an epidemiological study, just a working hypothesis or conjecture put together mainly from anecdotal observations. However, we can still analyze this type of claim in a similar manner. There is some experimental evidence that exercise can shorten the life of some insects, but this evidence can hardly be transferred to suggest that humans shouldn't even exercise. Basically, the first criterion of repeatability is not really fulfilled, as very few experts and researchers are making this claim on the basis of studies. Before examining this claim further, let's explain a few terms. In the sequence of analyzing things via the scientific method, we move from pure conjecture to establishing a law. This is a very difficult process, and we often use terms like hypothesis, theory, and law without realizing that we are conferring too much quote-unquote likelihood of truth on the claims being made. Here are some important definitions. Conjecture: a conclusion deduced by surmise or guesswork or a belief without sufficient evidence for proof. Hypothesis: a conjecture or a set of propositions set forth as an explanation for the occurrence of some specified group of phenomena, either asserted merely as a provisional conjecture to guide investigation or accepted as highly probable in light of established facts. Theory: a coherent group of general hypotheses used as principles of explanation for a class of phenomena, like Einstein's theory of relativity. Law: a theory that has received validation in all possible ramifications and to known levels of accuracy, like Newtonian mechanics, gravity, laws of thermodynamics, etc.
And I guess we probably should go back now that I guess Newtonian laws aren't so much laws. If anybody knows anything about quantum physics, it's kind of a lot stranger than we ever thought. So even by the time you get to law, there still could be something overturning it. I think the important thing with those four things, and Glassman used to emphasize that in some of his earlier articles, like most of what you'll talk to people about is that very first one. It's just pure conjecture.
Right.
You know, I mean, hypothesis is you put forward a hypothesis to explain observed data. So in our field, a lot of people would just be telling you stuff that they just believe without anything, you know, without any real data. So it really is, just have your bullshit sensor working. Maybe I shouldn't have called it critical thinking. It's sort of like developing a bullshit sensor. Maybe that should be the title of the module.
Yeah. Well, I remember for a while it was like, man, if I could just get everybody to overhead squat, because I had this idea that like I had heard from like some pretty reputable sources that, man, like the overhead squat is like this magical exercise, and if you can get people overhead squatting, then you really have got something there. But hey, lo and behold, it turns out after a couple of years of experience, like some people just aren't ever going to be able to do that stuff, and you don't need to waste a bunch of time trying to get folks into these wild positions. So you got to think about what the heck that you're doing, and otherwise you're going to end up going out and hurting folks. So Carl Sagan: there are many hypotheses in science which are wrong, and that's perfectly all right. They're the aperture to finding out what is right. Science is a self-correcting process. To be accepted, new ideas must survive the most rigorous standards of evidence and scrutiny. The material presented in these modules provides a good hypothesis of how to exercise for optimal health. MadLab coaches are working toward developing a theory of how to exercise to stay optimally healthy, but it is a very difficult task. We have a good hypothesis, but it will undoubtedly be adapted over the years as more information comes to light. Now back to ACT's proposal about exercise shortening life. It wasn't a study, and even if it was, epidemiological studies cannot provide enough evidence to establish a true theory. Therefore, the best we can call this is a working hypothesis. although we would argue it's mainly conjecture. Nevertheless, Peter Axe, the proponent of this working hypothesis, didn't produce any quantifiable relative risk to satisfy the second criteria. He used a lot of anecdotal evidence instead. For example, he argues that athletes are not long-lived, and the article uses the relatively early death of the great distance runner Emil Zatopek as an example. Beware of anecdotal evidence. There are always exceptions, even to well-established relationships. Some people can smoke a lot of cigarettes for a long time and not be harmed at all. Our advice for you is not to bet you are one of those exceptional individuals. So what about the logic of this hypothesis? It is true in many circumstances that athletes are not long-lived, but what does that tell us? Athletes are very driven individuals. They exhibit typical type A personalities, which have been linked to an increased incidence of coronary heart disease. I would argue that elite athletes experience high levels of physiological and mental stress. For one, they exercise well beyond what you and I would consider excessive. Therefore, while Mr. Axe claims may be true, they do not prove that you should avoid exercise. In fact, Axe admits that he indeed runs regularly. The evidence that he presents does clearly not satisfy the last criterion either. For example, another piece of anecdotal evidence presented in the article is that some population groups who sit around, play chess, and have long siestas are long-lived. Nobody in an Italian village cited as an example of a place with long longevity ran for exercise, claims Mr. Axe. However, is it the lack of exercise or the lack of a stressful lifestyle that is a key factor in this longevity? In addition, these people have to earn some sort of living, right? Are they farmers doing physical work while not relaxing? Not enough information is provided for a reasonable analysis of the claims. He has not shown that the relationship between lack of a formal exercise program and longevity in some groups is not caused by some other factor. Be aware that many of the claims made in the field of exercise and health may not be accurate. Do not assume that everything we say or on the web needs no further substantiation. Keep an open, critical mind when you read the modules and books. Our knowledge of how humans respond to exercise is always evolving.
And I should say, going back to that accident, whatever, that, you know, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do as a coach is obtain similar outcomes for your clients than they would have had maybe 200 years ago when they didn't sit as much and didn't have as much sedentary lifestyle. I mean, really, that's, you know, we can go in and look at farming communities and fishing communities and people that still work the land, etc. And you know, eating natural, you know, foods and gee, there's little to no chronic diseases. You know, missionaries and researchers and all those people in the last century that went and traveled the globe and met and studied and observed, you know, either hunter-gatherers or at least, you know, work in farming, natural, you know, like communities, noted little to no chronic diseases. The trick is, can we use modern exercise physiology / biomechanics / strength and conditioning principles to get those benefits in a shorter amount of time? I say to my students, one of the best things you could probably do is go for a 4-hour hike, come back, throw a few rocks around, and then go for a sprint.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, 5 or 6 short, high-intensity sprints or vertical jump, whatever. But you don't have time to do that.
Right.
So how can I get that into an hour session with my client? How can I get those benefits? And that's really what we're trying to do. Like, nobody's suggesting that there isn't 100 different ways to get healthy, you know, in terms of the way you exercise.
Right.
It's like, it's almost like, where's the research leading me? You know, and that's why there's a lot more research now on high intensity interval training and the benefits of that. Then we've also got to be careful about overdoing that. Maybe about 20% of our training should be that high intensity if we can, but maybe it's maybe 25%. You know, that's what we're looking at, right? That's what we're trying to study.
Awesome. So we have said that epidemiological studies of repeatable, logical, and so on might be useful in determining behaviors that are healthy and those that carry health risks. Nevertheless, we should be very cautious about applying results from epidemiological studies to our own lifestyles. This is not because we don't value the work of the researchers. It's simply that, by obvious necessity, most studies are conducted on sedentary North Americans, and many of them are overweight or even obese. So the logical question that we have to ask is, are the results applicable to everyone? Take Prof, who's a 60-year-old male of Northern European heritage who exercises frequently and intensely. He's very different from the average North American 50-plus-year-old. So we must view the results with caution. It depends on what variable is under study, of course, but it is something you might want to consider when reading the results of epidemiological studies. If, for example, you have a different ethnic background or different activity level from the population under study, you should be careful. Because as Mark Twain says, you got to be careful about reading health books. You could die of a misprint. Or Prof, your favorite here. How do you pronounce this guy's name? I have no idea. Andre
Gide.
Gide. Yeah. So why don't you wrap it up here with this quote by Andre?
Well, believe those who are seeking the truth, doubt those who find it. I like it. It's a nice little quote. It's if somebody's there and you're having a beer or coffee or whatever, chatting away, and they're telling you this one way to do stuff, when it comes to this area of health, then they're not trying to find more. They're not being critical thinkers. And I think going back to what you just wrote there, what I'd written about me being critical. Again, it's like, not that I'm ignoring studies, but it's more understanding the whole scientific process and understanding the pitfalls of research, using it to guide. Okay, there's a lot more work coming out now, some good research studies on high intensity interval training, etc. I'm going to start including that a little bit with my client, and I'm going to measure the response. Going back to that single subject experiment, I want to come all the way back to that. In other words, being a bit of a scientist about this. I have a colleague at the university who distinguishes coach scientists from coach followers. The coach follower would just go and see what Michael Phelps is doing for a client that likes to swim and tell him to do that, which is rubbish, because no human being other than Michael Phelps could probably do what he does. Versus somebody that goes, okay, here's the evidence. This looks like a good way of implementing things, and I'm going to monitor how that affects my client. Mm-hmm. That's a coach scientist, somebody that is not willing just to sort of follow the trends. I'm like, oh yeah, everybody's doing that, I'll just keep doing it. Because if you do that, yeah, you're going to get some successes, but you really won't be able to help your client as much as somebody that's doing regular assessments. Okay, what's your time on this workout? Boom. Okay, that's going down. What's happening? What's wrong here? Have you been coming in? And actually, dealing with them as an individual and monitoring, measures. Like health measures, fitness measures.
Yeah,
that's what you got. Yeah.
Awesome. And these are probably going to be the folks that are going to make it long term in our as a coach for life in the Mad Lab system, are the folks that are actually interested in thinking in a critical manner. If you're interested in just kind of like following along, then you're probably going to lose interest in whatever it is that you're doing. As you want to learn more and more and more and stay curious and interested in how to improve yourself and your clients, you have to think critically. If you're not, it's not going to go anywhere for you. So
and I think also with our metric in MadLab being lifetime client value, we're not interested in high churn rates and just getting people through the door with a Groupons. That if you do treat it like a single subject experiment, if you do work with that client, monitor their improvements, etc., then you're much more likely to keep them for a lifetime, to be a coach for life.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks everybody for joining us here on our our initial foray down this new way of presenting this information. It took us quite a bit longer to get through this than I had envisioned, but hopefully everybody will get some good use out of it. Tony, thanks a lot for jumping on board with me and getting this done. And hopefully we can do more of it in the future. And to all of you out there, good luck with your journey into the rest of the PCDP here. And yeah, ask questions. Don't take for granted the information that we're giving you. When you come in for your oral exam at the end of JA1, we expect you to bring us some questions as well as us questioning you. So look forward to seeing you all soon.
Yep. Yeah, I think if people want this to happen again, we can hopefully streamline them and keep them a little shorter, as you say. But hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye.